3 days ago, I created the biggest problem of my life, and it happened because I couldn't keep my mouth shut for 5 seconds. Every Sunday evening, my family had a video call. Usually it was harmless. My mom would ask about classes, my grandmother would remind me to eat more vegetables, and my older sister would somehow turn every conversation into an update about her wedding plans. Since my sister's engagement had been announced 2 months earlier, those calls had become even longer. That night started exactly the same way. I was sitting in my dorm room with my laptop balanced on my desk while my family filled the screen. My grandmother was talking about flowers. My aunt was talking about decorations. My sister was talking about venue changes. I was barely listening. Then my mother smiled at me. That smile should have been a warning. "So, Arian," she said, "any special man in your life yet?" I immediately sighed. "Mom, what?" she asked innocently. "You ask me that every week. And one day you'll finally have an answer." My aunt laughed. My grandmother nodded. My sister smirked. I already knew where this conversation was going. "No," I said. "Still single." My mother looked disappointed. "You're 22. Thank you for reminding me. You spend too much time studying. I'm in architecture. That's literally my job." My sister leaned closer to the camera. "Maybe he's secretly dating someone." I rolled my eyes. "I'm not." "Maybe he's hiding a boyfriend." "I'm not." My aunt joined in. "Maybe he's embarrassed." I could feel myself being cornered. Everyone was staring, waiting, smiling. For some reason, something inside me snapped. Before my brain could stop my mouth, the words came out. "Actually, I do have a boyfriend." Silence. Complete silence. The entire screen froze. Then chaos exploded. My mother practically screamed. "You do?" My grandmother gasped. My aunt clapped. My sister narrowed her eyes immediately. Unlike everyone else, she wasn't celebrating. She was investigating. "What?" she asked. I had already committed to the lie. There was no escape now. "Yeah." Mom leaned forward. "What's his name?" The first name that appeared in my head was the worst possible choice. Jensen. The moment I said it, I wanted to throw myself out a window. Jensen Hayes. My best friend. My best friend of 3 years. My best friend who definitely wasn't my boyfriend. "Oh my God," Mom said. "How long have you been together?" "For months." Another lie. "How did you meet?" "Library." "What does he study?" "Literature." At least that part was true. Questions kept coming. I kept inventing answers. Each lie created 3 new lies. I was drowning. Then my sister delivered the final blow. "When do we get to meet him?" I froze. My mother smiled brightly. "Actually, that's perfect. Bring Jensen to the engagement party next month." My stomach dropped. Next month. 28 days away. I had just promised to bring a fake boyfriend to a real family event. After the call ended, I sat motionless for almost 10 minutes. Then I looked at the ceiling. I'm an idiot. The next morning, I found Jensen sitting outside the campus library. He was exactly where I expected him to be. A book in one hand, coffee in the other, completely relaxed. Unlike me, I walked over. Jensen looked up and smiled. "Hey!" I dropped into the seat across from him. "We have a problem." He immediately closed his book. "What kind of problem?" "The life-destroying kind." His smile widened. "Interesting. Continue." I took a deep breath. Then I told him everything. Every single detail. The phone call. The lies. The fake relationship. The engagement party. The fact that I had used his name. For 3 seconds Jensen just stared. Then he burst out laughing. Not normal laughing. The kind where you can't breathe. The kind where tears start forming. People nearby actually turned around to look at him. "This isn't funny," I complained. "It absolutely is. Jensen, you told your entire family we're dating?" I panicked. "You used my name?" I panicked. "You invented an entire relationship?" I panicked. He laughed even harder. I hated him. 5 minutes later, he finally calmed down. Then he shook his head. "No." I blinked. "What?" "No." "No what?" "I'm not pretending to be your boyfriend." My heart sank. "Jensen,
No.
Please. No. Please. No. I spent nearly 20 minutes trying to convince him. Nothing worked. Finally, he stood up. You created this disaster. You fix it. Then he walked away. For the next 2 days, my life became miserable. I couldn't focus in class. Couldn't sleep. I couldn't think about anything except the engagement party. Every scenario ended horribly. Eventually, I found Jensen again. This time outside a coffee shop. He took one look at me and frowned. You look terrible. Thank you. When was the last time you slept? I don't remember.
Jensen sighed.
Then he sat down across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he rubbed his forehead. I hate that you're making me feel guilty. Hope appeared. Is that a yes? He pointed at me. Don't get excited. Too late. I'm only considering it. That's basically a yes. It isn't. 5 minutes later, it became a yes. Jensen leaned back in his chair. Fine. I nearly choked. Really? Really? I almost hugged him. Instead, I forced myself to stay seated. You are officially my favorite person. I know. Relief flooded through me. Then Jensen held up a finger. One condition. Of course, there was a condition. What? If we're doing this, we do it properly. I frowned. What does that mean? It means your family has to believe it. They will. No, they won't. They might. They definitely won't. He pointed at me again. You panic when you lie. That's fair. So we need practice. Practice? He nodded. We're going to act like a real couple. I stared. What? Dates. Dates. Fake dates. My heart suddenly felt very strange. Jensen continued speaking like this was completely normal. We need a believable story. Okay. We need chemistry. Okay. We need habits. Okay. We need inside jokes. We already have those. Good point. For some reason, neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then Jensen smiled. Our first practice date is Friday. Friday arrived much faster than expected. The entire day I felt nervous, which made absolutely no sense. It was Jensen. I spent time with Jensen almost every day. This shouldn't have felt different. Yet somehow it did. That evening I arrived at a small cafe near campus. I got there 15 minutes early, because apparently anxiety was now my full-time hobby. Then Jensen arrived. The moment I saw him, my brain stopped working. He looked good. Very good. Dangerously good. A dark jacket. Black jeans. His hair slightly messy from the wind. Nothing unusual. Yet somehow everything felt different. Jensen smiled when he spotted me. Hey! Hey! He sat down. For a second we just looked at each other. Then both laughed awkwardly. This is weird, I admitted. A little. We ordered drinks. Talked. Joked. The conversation eventually became normal again. Then something happened. A waitress stopped beside our table. She looked at both of us and smiled. What can I get for you two gentlemen? We placed our order. The waitress wrote it down. Then she smiled again. You two are adorable together. I nearly inhaled my own drink. The waitress walked away. Silence followed. I rubbed the back of my neck. Well, that happened. Jensen looked amused. Then he suddenly stood up. I frowned. What are you doing? Instead of answering, he walked around the table. Then he sat beside me. Not across from me. Beside me. Very close. My heart immediately started acting stupid. Jensen casually draped an arm around my shoulders. I froze. Completely froze. He smiled. If we're going to do this, we should practice properly. The waitress returned with our drinks. The moment she saw us, her smile widened. Mission accomplished. I couldn't even speak. For the next hour, we stayed like that. Talking. Laughing. Pretending. At least that's what it was supposed to be. But every time Jensen smiled at me, something felt different. Every time his shoulder touched mine, I noticed. Every time he looked directly into my eyes, I forgot what I was saying. Eventually the date ended. We walked outside together. The evening air felt cool. Jensen shoved his hands into his pockets. See? Not so hard. Yeah. We'll survive the engagement party. Probably. He smiled. Then he started walking backward down the sidewalk. Don't panic, Arian. I'm not panicking. You always panic. That's not true. It absolutely is. I couldn't stop smiling. Jensen laughed. Then he turned and headed toward his apartment. I watched him go. For some reason, I stood there longer than necessary. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. Just one sentence. I can't wait to meet Jensen next month. I stared at the screen. Then I looked in the direction Jensen had disappeared. For the first time, I realized something much more dangerous than my lie. The engagement party wasn't the real problem anymore. The real problem was that after one fake date, I was already starting to wish it wasn't fake at all. The fake dating plan was only supposed to help me survive one engagement party. That was the entire purpose. Jensen and I had agreed on that from the beginning. We would practice, convince my family, survive one awkward evening, and then everything would go back to normal. The problem was that after our first practice date, nothing felt normal anymore. The following Monday, I was halfway through a lecture when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and immediately saw Jensen's name. Practice date 2. Tonight. Movie theater. 7 p.m. Don't be late. I stared at the message longer than necessary. Then another text arrived. And wear something decent. Last time looked like you got dressed during a fire drill. I smiled despite myself. A second later, another message appeared. That was a joke. Mostly. My professor called on me at that exact moment and I completely missed the question. The entire class laughed when I gave an answer that had absolutely nothing to do with the lecture. By the end of the day, I was already annoyed with myself. Why was I nervous? It was Jensen. We'd watched movies together dozens of times. We'd grabbed food together hundreds of times. None of this should have felt different. Yet when I arrived at the theater and spotted him waiting near the entrance, my stomach immediately tightened. Jensen looked up from his phone and smiled. You actually listened. I frowned. What? He pointed at my jacket. You dressed like a functioning adult. Thank you, I think. You're welcome. We bought tickets and headed inside. Halfway through the previews, Jensen casually lifted the armrest between our seats. I looked over. What are you doing? Couples don't usually have a plastic barrier between them, right? We're practicing, right? He nodded seriously. Exactly. 10 minutes later, our shoulders were touching. 20 minutes later, our hands brushed while reaching for popcorn. 30 minutes later, Jensen simply took my hand and intertwined our fingers. I nearly forgot how breathing worked. He kept looking at the movie screen like nothing unusual had happened. Meanwhile, I spent the next hour unable to focus on anything happening in the film. Afterward, we walked back across campus. Jensen seemed perfectly relaxed. I was trying very hard not to think about how naturally his hand had fit in mine. A few days later, he sent another message. Practice date 3. Saturday. Where? I replied. You'll see. That turned out to be a bookstore downtown. Jensen disappeared between shelves while I followed behind him. At one point, he appeared holding a fantasy novel. This is the series you wanted to read. I blinked. You remembered that? Jensen looked confused. Of course I remembered. Then he handed me the book and continued walking. The strange thing was that he genuinely didn't seem aware of how easily he remembered everything about me. My favorite coffee order. My class schedule. My birthday. The names of professors I hated. He remembered all of it. I watched him walk ahead and suddenly wondered whether he'd always been this important to me or if I was only noticing now. Before I could think about it further, someone called Jensen's name. We both turned. A tall guy was approaching us. Confident smile. Expensive clothes. The kind of person who looked like he belonged on magazine covers. Jensen's expression brightened immediately. Mason. They hugged. Not a quick greeting. A real hug. For some reason I didn't like that. At all. Jensen introduced us. Arian, this is Mason. We used to work on the literary journal together. Mason smiled and shook my hand. I've heard a lot about you. I looked at Jensen. You have? Jensen suddenly seemed awkward. Maybe. Mason laughed. Trust me. I've heard plenty. The conversation continued for several minutes. I barely paid attention. Mostly because Mason and Jensen were getting along a little too well for my liking. Eventually Mason left. As soon as he disappeared, Jensen looked at me. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." "That's a lie." "No, it isn't." Jensen studied my face for a moment before shaking his head. "You're weird today." The annoying part was that he was right. I was weird. I just didn't know why. The following week things became even more complicated. Our architecture department announced a 2-day academic trip to visit several restoration sites outside the city. Students would be staying overnight at a hotel arranged by the university. I didn't think much about it until the professor started assigning rooms. Then everything went wrong. Or right. I still wasn't sure. The professor looked at his list and said, Arian Brooks and Jensen Hayes. The entire room immediately accepted that pairing. Apparently everyone already assumed we spent all our time together anyway. Jensen glanced at me and shrugged. That night we ended up sharing a hotel room. 2 beds. 1 room. Nothing inappropriate. Completely normal. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Around midnight neither of us could sleep. We ended up sitting near the window talking. The conversation gradually shifted away from classes and assignments. Jensen talked about his future, about graduation, about being terrified of leaving university behind. It was one of the few times I'd seen him genuinely vulnerable. "Everyone thinks I have everything figured out," he admitted. "I don't. Nobody does." "Good. That makes me feel slightly better." We both laughed. Then he looked at me. "What scares you?" I thought about it for a moment. "Losing people." Jensen's expression softened. "Yeah." The way he said it made me wonder if he understood exactly what I meant. The next morning the trip continued normally, but something between us had shifted. We were closer than before, comfortable in a different way, more aware of each other. Then came the disaster. A week later I got sick. Really sick. I spent an entire day in bed feeling miserable. Around evening someone knocked on my dorm room door. I dragged myself over and opened it. Jensen stood there holding medicine, soup, sports drinks, and enough supplies to survive a small apocalypse. "How did you know?" I asked. "Your roommate told me." Before I could protest, he pushed inside. "Sit down." "Jensen, sit." For the next several hours, he took care of everything. He made sure I ate, made sure I drank water, made sure I actually took the medicine instead of pretending. At some point, I fell asleep. When I woke up during the night, the room was dark. Jensen was still there. He had fallen asleep in a chair beside my bed, one arm hanging awkwardly, head tilted against the wall, completely uncomfortable. He could have gone home hours ago. Instead, he stayed, just to make sure I was okay. I stared at him for a long moment. Something inside my chest tightened. Not painfully, just enough to make me realize a truth I had been avoiding. This wasn't just friendship anymore. At least not for me. I liked Jensen. Really liked him. The realization should have terrified me. Instead it felt strangely obvious. Like I had known all along and was only admitting it now. Unfortunately, life decided that was the perfect moment to make everything worse. A few days later, we attended a birthday party for a mutual friend. Music played. People talked. Everything seemed normal. Then Mason arrived. Throughout the evening, he kept drifting toward Jensen. Talking to him, laughing with him, standing beside him. Every time I looked up, Mason was there. Near the end of the party, I watched Mason say something that made Jensen laugh. Then he stepped forward and pulled Jensen into a hug. Something unpleasant twisted inside my stomach. Before I could stop myself, I looked away. I grabbed my jacket. Then I left. I didn't tell anyone. I just walked out. Behind me, Jensen finally noticed I was gone. And for the first time since this entire fake dating disaster had started, he looked genuinely worried. I spent the entire weekend avoiding Jensen. That was difficult because Jensen apparently had no intention of letting me disappear. The morning after the party, I woke up to 3 unread messages. The first one said, "Where did you go?" The second said, "Did something happen?" The third simply said, "Arian." I stared at the screen for almost a minute before putting my phone down without replying. It was childish. I knew it was childish. But every time I remembered Mason wrapping his arms around Jensen, That uncomfortable feeling came back. The worst part was that I had absolutely no right to feel that way. Jensen wasn't my boyfriend. Our relationship wasn't real. The jealousy made no sense. Yet it refused to go away. Monday afternoon, Jensen cornered me outside my architecture building. I exited class and nearly walked straight into him. There you are. I immediately tried to walk around him. He stepped sideways. Nope. I have somewhere to be. You're lying. I am not. You absolutely are. I sighed. Jensen folded his arms. Okay. What's going on? Nothing. Aryan. Nothing. He stared at me. I stared back. Neither of us moved. Finally Jensen shook his head. Fine. That should have made me feel relieved. Instead I felt guilty. Because for the first time since we'd become friends, I was intentionally shutting him out. Over the next week things only got worse. The fake dates stopped. The constant texting slowed down. The easy conversations disappeared. Every interaction felt awkward. Forced. Incomplete. I hated it. Apparently Jensen hated it too. One afternoon he appeared at my apartment carrying takeout containers. I brought food. I looked at him suspiciously. You brought a bribe. Correct. What do you want? 5 minutes. I sighed and stepped aside. Jensen entered. We sat at the kitchen table. For a while we ate in silence. Then he finally put down his fork. I'm worried about you. I looked away. You don't need to be. That's not my decision. I hated how sincere he sounded. Because a part of me wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to admit that seeing Mason with him had bothered me. That I was jealous. That I couldn't stop thinking about him. Instead I said the safest thing possible. I'm just stressed. His expression made it clear he didn't believe me. But he didn't push. That somehow made me feel worse. A few days later, I was leaving the library when I spotted Jensen sitting at an outdoor table with Mason. My first instinct was to turn around. Unfortunately Mason saw me. He waved. Hey, Aryan. Great. Now I had to walk over. Jensen looked up immediately. His face brightened for a split second before becoming more cautious. Like he wasn't sure how I would react. That hurt more than I expected. I sat down. The conversation felt painfully awkward. Mostly because I couldn't stop noticing how comfortable Mason seemed around Jensen. At one point Mason excused himself to take a phone call. The second he walked away, Jensen leaned forward. Can we talk? We're talking. You know what I mean. I did. And I didn't want to. So I stood up. I have class. You don't. I froze. You checked my schedule? I know your schedule. That wasn't helping. I grabbed my backpack. I'll see you later. Then I left again. By that point, I was becoming very good at running away. The following weekend, something happened that changed everything. Or at least it should have. I just didn't realize it at the time. Jensen and Mason were sitting outside the student center. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had taken a shortcut across campus. As I approached, I heard my name. Instinctively, I stopped. They hadn't seen me. Normally, I would have walked away. Instead, I stayed. Mason was speaking. So you're really not going to tell him? Jensen laughed softly. Tell him what? You know exactly what. A long silence followed. Then Mason sighed. You're impossible. I'm aware. No, seriously. You've been in love with that guy for years. My entire body froze. Years. I stopped breathing. For a moment I thought I'd heard wrong. Then Jensen spoke. His voice was quieter than usual. I know. My heart slammed against my ribs. Mason continued. So tell him. I can't. Why? Another silence. Then Jensen answered. Because if he doesn't feel the same, I lose him. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't process what I was hearing. Jensen loved someone. Someone he'd loved for years. A painful feeling spread through my chest. Because despite everything, I wasn't completely sure he meant me. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Before I could hear anything else, someone walked between us. By the time I could see them again, the conversation had shifted. A minute later, I quietly left. My thoughts were a complete disaster. For the rest of the day, I replayed those words over and over. You've been in love with that guy for years. Who? Who was he talking about? The obvious answer should have been me. But every time I remembered Mason, doubt returned. Maybe Mason knew about someone else. Maybe Jensen had loved someone before. Maybe I was just being ridiculous. By the time evening arrived, I had successfully confused myself even more. Then another disaster happened. 3 days before the engagement party, I saw Jensen and Mason together again. This time there was no conversation, no context, just one moment, one horrible moment. I was walking across campus when I spotted them near the parking lot. Mason said something. Jensen laughed. Then Mason stepped closer and kissed Jensen's cheek. Quick kiss. Nothing dramatic. Nothing romantic. But from where I stood, it looked intimate. Very intimate. My stomach dropped. There it was. Proof. Or at least what I thought was proof. Before Jensen could react, I turned around and walked away. I never saw him push Mason back. I never heard what Mason said afterward. I never gave Jensen a chance to explain. Instead, I spent the next 2 days convincing myself that I finally understood everything. Jensen loved someone. That someone wasn't me. And I had been stupid enough to think otherwise. The engagement party arrived faster than expected. The night before the event, Jensen came over to help me prepare. At least that was the excuse. The truth was obvious. Both of us were looking for reasons to spend time together. Even after weeks of tension, even after everything, neither of us seemed ready to completely let go. I was standing in front of the mirror struggling with a tie when Jensen entered my room. "You're doing it wrong." "I know." He walked over. Without asking permission, he took the tie from my hands. His fingers brushed mine. The contact felt dangerous. Neither of us spoke. Jensen focused on fixing the knot. I focused on not staring at him. Unfortunately, that was impossible. He was standing incredibly close. Close enough that I could see every detail of his face. Close enough to remember every fake date, every conversation, every moment that had started feeling real. When he finished, he looked up. Our eyes met. The room suddenly felt very quiet. For one impossible second, it seemed like neither of us knew how to move. Jensen's gaze dropped briefly to my lips, then returned to my eyes. My pulse immediately doubled. Part of me wanted him to kiss me. The other part remembered Mason, remembered the jealousy, remembered the confusion. So I stepped back. Just one step. But it was enough. Something changed in Jensen's expression. Not anger, not frustration, disappointment, maybe even hurt. He forced a small smile. "There." His voice sounded different. "Tie fixed. Thanks." The distance between us suddenly felt enormous. A few minutes later he left. I stood alone in my room staring at the closed door. My chest felt heavy, because deep down I knew something. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. And for the first time since this entire fake relationship had begun, I made a decision. After the engagement party, I was ending it. No more pretending. No more confusion. No more false hope. Even if it broke my heart. Especially if it broke my heart. The day of my sister's engagement party arrived far too quickly. One moment I was standing in my room staring at the tie Jensen had fixed the night before, and the next I was standing outside the hotel ballroom trying not to panic. My family was inside. The fake relationship was about to become public. And somehow that wasn't even what worried me anymore. What worried me was Jensen. I still couldn't get the image of Mason kissing his cheek out of my head. I still couldn't stop thinking about the conversation I'd overheard. Most of all, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Jensen had looked at me when I stepped away from him the night before. Car pulled up beside me. Jensen stepped out and immediately stole every coherent thought from my brain. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly. His hair was neatly styled. He looked calm, confident, and ridiculously handsome. "You okay?" he asked. I laughed nervously. "Not even a little." Jensen smiled and held out his hand. "Good thing you have a fake boyfriend to help." For a moment I just stared at his hand. Then I took it. The second our fingers intertwined, some of the tension disappeared. That had always been the problem with Jensen. No matter how complicated things became, being near him still felt right. Together we walked into the ballroom. My family spotted us almost immediately. My mother practically ran across the room. "Jensen," she said before hugging him. "Not me. Him." Jensen laughed and hugged her back. "Hi, Mrs. Brooks." "Susan," my mother corrected. "I've told you to call me Susan." Within minutes Jensen was surrounded by my entire family. My grandmother adored him. My aunt adored him. My sister looked far too entertained by everything. Somehow Jensen handled all of them effortlessly. Watching him fit so naturally into my family hurt more than it should have. Because I couldn't stop thinking about how perfect he looked standing there. Like he belonged. Like he'd always belonged. The evening moved forward. Dinner came and went. Conversations flowed. Everyone seemed happy. Especially my mother. At one point she pulled Jensen aside. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, but I caught part of the conversation. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jensen looked confused. "For what?" My mother smiled. "For making my son happy." I watched Jensen freeze. Just for a second. Then he glanced across the room toward me. The look in his eyes made my chest tighten. Later, the music started. Couples slowly moved toward the dance floor. Before I could escape, Jensen appeared beside me. "Dance with me." "I don't dance." "That's a lie." "It's barely a lie." Jensen extended his hand anyway. "Come on." A few moments later we were standing in the middle of the dance floor. One of my hands rested on his shoulder. His hand settled against my waist. We moved slowly with the music. Everything around us seemed to fade away. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Then Jensen smiled softly. "Your family likes me. Unfortunately." He laughed. "Your mom might actually adopt me. I've considered warning you." The laughter faded. Neither of us looked away. The music continued. The distance between us felt smaller than ever. Then I remembered. Mason. The confusion returned instantly. The doubt. The jealousy. The fear. I stepped back slightly. Jensen noticed immediately. His smile disappeared. A few minutes later the song ended. Without saying anything, Jensen reached for my hand and led me toward the balcony doors. We walked outside into the evening air. The moment the doors closed behind us, silence settled between us. Jensen finally turned toward me. "Okay." His voice was calm. "What's wrong?" I looked away. "Nothing. We're not doing that anymore." "Doing what?" "Pretending everything is fine." I swallowed. Jensen took a step closer. "You've been avoiding me for weeks." I said nothing. "Every time I get close, you pull away." Still nothing. "Arian." Frustration finally broke through my defenses. "Why don't you just go talk to Mason?" The words came out harsher than I intended. Jensen blinked. "What?" "You heard me." For several seconds he simply stared at me. Then, to my complete surprise, he laughed. Not because it was funny. The kind of laugh someone makes when they genuinely cannot believe what they're hearing. "Mason?" "Yes, Mason." Jensen ran a hand through his hair. "You've got to be kidding me." "Why?" "Because Mason isn't the person I want." My heart started pounding. "Then who is?" Jensen looked directly into my eyes. "You." Everything stopped. The music from inside faded away. The conversations disappeared. There was only Jensen. Only his voice. Only the words I'd wanted to hear for weeks. "What?" I whispered. Jensen took another step forward. "I've been in love with you since freshman year." Couldn't breathe. "What?" I tried not to be. He laughed softly. "Believe me, I tried." My entire world tilted. Suddenly every moment made sense. Every practice date. Every look. Every touch. Every time he'd remembered something about me. Every time he'd shown up when I needed him. Jensen shook his head. "When you asked me to pretend to be your boyfriend, I almost said no." "Why?" "Because I knew it would make things worse." His smile was sad and affectionate at the same time. "I knew I'd fall even harder." My eyes burned. "Jensen." He stepped closer until there was almost no space between us. "The guy I've loved for years was never Mason." His voice softened. "It was always you." I felt every wall inside me collapse at once. All the fear. All the confusion. All the doubt. Gone. "You're an idiot," I said. Jensen blinked. "Excuse me? You've loved me for years and never said anything?" He pointed at me. You're one to talk. I laughed through tears. Then I shook my head. I love you too. Jensen froze. Completely froze. What? I love you too. The smile that appeared on his face might have been the happiest thing I'd ever seen. A second later, he pulled me toward him and kissed me. This wasn't practice. This wasn't pretending. This wasn't part of some ridiculous plan. It was real. Every feeling we'd been hiding finally had somewhere to go. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us could stop smiling. The balcony door suddenly opened. We turned. My mother stood there. My sister stood beside her. Unfortunately, so did half my family. Nobody spoke for 3 seconds. Then my sister grinned. About time. My mother immediately started crying. I knew it, she announced proudly. Jensen buried his face in my shoulder while I groaned. Somehow the entire family laughed. 6 months later, Jensen and I returned to the little cafe where our first fake date had happened. We sat at the same table, ordered the same drinks, talked about everything and nothing. At one point, Jensen pulled an old receipt from his wallet and handed it to me. I turned it over. Written on the back were 6 simple words. I liked you from day one. I looked up. Jensen was smiling. And for the first time since this entire disaster began, there were no lies left between us. The fake relationship had ended. The real one had finally begun. And that's where Arian and Jensen's story comes to an end. What started as one desperate lie became the beginning of a love neither of them expected, proving that sometimes the person you've been searching for is the one who's been standing beside you all along. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world and helps bring more heartfelt stories like this to life. Until next time, take care and keep believing in unexpected love.